Hey guys, tonight we journey back in time, not to witness grand battles or the coronations of emperors, but to experience something far more essential. We're settling into the remarkably unexciting life of a silk route toll collector. Imagine, if you will, the vast, sun-drenched expanse of Central Asia, sometime in the, let's say 7th century. Dust is your constant companion. The highlight of your day might be correctly identifying a new species of beetle, and your main responsibility is to not fall asleep before the caravans arrive. Frankly, with the sheer monotony, you probably won't survive this depiction without nodding off, which is, of course, entirely the point. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not post your current location and local time in the comments? It's always fascinating to see where everyone is drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first hint of dawn is a whisper of gray against the inky blackness, a subtle promise that the oppressive heat of yesterday will, indeed, return. You stir on your simple woven mat, a groan escaping your lips that sounds remarkably like the creak of an unoiled cartwheel. This is your life, a tiny, almost insignificant speck on the vast tapestry of the silk routes, that sprawling network of trade that connected the mighty empires of the East and West. While emperors and merchants dream of silk, spices, and jade, your dreams are probably more about a slightly less lumpy mattress. Your alarm clock is, well, the sun. Reliable, if a little too bright on a Monday morning, even in the 7th century, assuming you even have a concept of Monday. Each day bleeds into the next with a gentle, predictable rhythm. Slowly, you sit up, your joints protesting with a series of soft pops and crackles. The air in your small, mud brick hut, let's call it a toll booth for dramatic effect, though it's more of a sturdy shelter against the elements, is cool for now, carrying the scent of dry earth and the faint, lingering aroma of last night's meager fire. Dust, the ever-present souvenir of the Silk Road, coats every surface with a fine, pale film. You run a hand over your face, feeling the familiar grit. It's less a nuisance now and more a part of your personal ecosystem. A truly spectacular, jaw-stretching yawn escapes you, a full-body declaration that another day of diligent toll collection is about to commence. You stretch, your arms reaching towards the low, thatched roof, fingers brushing against the dried reeds. From outside, the first real rays of sunlight are beginning to paint the distant, hazy mountains in shades of soft apricot and rose. It's a beautiful sight, objectively speaking, but for you, it's simply the cue to begin. The concept of rush hour hasn't quite reached this particular stretch of desolate, albeit economically vital, highway. Your first customer might not appear for hours yet. You shuffle to the single, unglazed window slit, peering out at the vast, empty landscape. The track, barely discernible from the surrounding scrubland, stretches east and west, vanishing into the shimmering horizon. This is your domain. Not a kingdom, not even a particularly prosperous farmstead, but a crucial, if unglamorous, checkpoint. Historians still argue whether these smaller, more remote toll stations were primarily for revenue collection to fill the coffers of some distant satrap or khan, or if their strategic placement was more about asserting regional authority and gathering information on passing caravans, a sort of low-tech intelligence network. You, of course, are blissfully unaware of such high-minded debates. Your concern is far more immediate, hoping the next merchant has coins that aren't too clipped. You possess a small, clay pot in which you keep a collection of unusually smooth pebbles. Each one, you've decided, represents a day where absolutely nothing noteworthy happened, which means your collection is growing rather impressively. It's a small, personal quirk, a silent monument to the profound stillness of your existence. There's a local superstition, half believed, half scoffed at by even the most credulous, that the spirits of the desert whisper secrets to those who listen closely enough during the quietest hours of the day. So far, all they've whispered to you is that another sandstorm is probably on its way next week. Helpful, but not exactly world-shattering. The sun climbs higher, its warmth beginning to seep into the land, chasing away the last of the pre-dawn chill. It's time to officially open for business, which mainly involves you sitting on a slightly more comfortable stool just outside your hut, positioning your vital ledger and ink pot in the shade of a tattered awning. The ledger, a precious item bound in cracked leather, is your most important tool, its pages filled with your spidery script detailing who passed, what they carried, and how much they reluctantly parted with. You consider updating your LinkedIn profile, Silk Route Toll Facilitation Officer, specializing in dust management and advanced yawning techniques. But then you remember LinkedIn won't be invented for another, 13 centuries or so. Pity. For now, the vast, silent landscape is your office, and the slowly rising sun is your only immediate supervisor. Another day begins, promising exactly what it delivered yesterday, a whole lot of waiting, punctuated by the occasional jingle of coins. Your gaze drifts from the distant horizon, that shimmering line where earth meets sky, and settles upon your immediate kingdom, the toll booth. It's not exactly a fortress, nor is it a palace, though in its own humble way, it's just as vital to the smooth, albeit slow, functioning of this particular artery of commerce. You lean against the sun-warmed mud brick wall, the rough texture familiar against your back. The structure itself is a testament to practicality and the materials at hand. Mostly sun-dried bricks, made from the very earth you stand on, mixed with straw for a bit of extra structural integrity, a mainstream building technique used for millennia in these arid climes, from simple dwellings to, well, slightly more ambitious toll booths. The walls are thick, which is a small blessing, offering a surprisingly effective buffer against the brutal summer sun and the equally biting winter winds. You've heard some of the older locals mutter that if you mix in a particular type of river reed, dried under a full moon, into the mud mix, it helps keep the scorpions out. You haven't tested this theory, mostly because full moons are for sleeping, and scorpion encounters are rare enough not to warrant specialized construction techniques. Still, it's a comforting, if slightly odd, local tidbit. The roof is a simple affair, a framework of gnarled, sun-bleached wooden poles, probably scavenged from some long-dead oasis or traded from a passing caravan carrying timber from more forested lands. Laid across these are layers of dried reeds and tough grasses, topped with a final coating of mud to seal it against the infrequent, but sometimes surprisingly heavy, downpours. It sags a little in the middle, giving the whole structure a slightly weary, slump-shouldered look, as if it too feels the immense boredom of its existence. You've patched it a few times yourself after particularly strong winds, using whatever materials came to hand, a discarded piece of felt, some extra mud, and a prayer to any deity who might be listening for a less leaky roof. It's not winning any architectural awards, let's be honest. If this were a modern reality TV show, the reveal would be met with polite, slightly strained smiles. Charming, they'd say. So rustic. There's a single doorway, currently open to invite any faint breeze that might be wandering by. The door itself is a sturdy, if somewhat splintered, wooden plank affair, hung on leather hinges that groan like an old man every time it's moved. Your high-tech security system involves a heavy wooden bar that slides across the inside. It's more to deter opportunistic jackals or the occasional, overly curious desert fox than any serious human threat. Bandits, the bogeymen of Silk Road tales, tend to prefer richer pickings than a solitary toll collector whose most valuable possession is probably his ink pot. Or so you hope. You walk around the small structure, your sandals scuffing softly in the dust. There are no windows on the back wall, a sensible precaution against the prevailing winds that sometimes carry so much sand they can strip paint from a non-existent caravan. The side walls each have one small, high slit, more for ventilation and a sliver of light than for any real view. They're too narrow for anyone to climb through, unless they're a particularly agile snake, and you've taken measures against those by occasionally scattering pungent herbs around the perimeter. Historians still argue whether the specific design of these small outposts was standardized by a central authority, perhaps with little clay tablets detailing approved dimensions and materials, or if their forms simply evolved based on local materials, the immediate defensive needs, and the whims of whoever built them. Yours feels very much like it falls into the evolved by whatever was lying around category. Stepping inside, the cool dimness is a welcome change. It takes a moment for your eyes to adjust from the glare outside. The interior is, to put it mildly, minimalist. There's your sleeping mat, neatly rolled and tucked into one corner. In another, a few clay pots hold your meager supplies, water, some dried dates, a small bag of grain. A small, fire-blackened patch on the floor marks the spot where you huddle over a tiny dung fire on cold nights. Your primary workstation, however, is a low, roughly hewn wooden table, more of a sturdy plank set on two uneven rock supports, really. And upon this sacred altar of commerce rests the heart of your operation, the ledger. Ah, the ledger. It's not much to look at, perhaps a foot long and a bit less wide, its leather cover worn smooth and dark with age and countless handlings. The pages within are a mix of parchment and perhaps some of that newfangled paper that's starting to trickle in from the east, though parchment is still considered more durable for important records. Each page is ruled with faint, sometimes wavering lines you've painstakingly drawn yourself using a straight piece of wood and a diluted ink. Your ink pot, a small stone vessel, sits beside it, stoppered with a piece of dried fig to keep the precious liquid from evaporating too quickly. Your pen is a sharpened reed, its tip carefully split to hold the ink. You have a small collection of these, in various states of wear, because finding a good reed and shaping it just right is a small art form in itself. You're not exactly a calligrapher, but your script is legible enough, a series of pragmatic symbols and numbers that record the mundane flow of goods and silver. This ledger, with its smudges and blots, is your shield, your justification, your daily grind made tangible. It's probably more exciting to read than some modern tax codes, but that's not saying much. The air inside smells of old paper, dry earth, and the faint, metallic tang of ink. It's a smell that is, for you, the smell of work, of order, of another day ticked off. You run a finger over the cover of the ledger, a familiar, almost affectionate gesture. This book is your silent confidant, the repository of countless tiny transactions that, when pieced together, tell a much larger story of empires trading, cultures meeting, and the slow, inexorable movement of history. Though, from your perspective, it mostly tells the story of how many camels passed through yesterday and whether a particular merchant from Samarkand tried to shortchange you again. You wouldn't trade it for a golden-laid scroll. Well, maybe you would. Gold is gold, after all. But you'd miss the familiar weight of it, the comforting predictability of its pages. The sun, now a definitive, glaring presence in the sky, has chased away any lingering coolness. It's time for your incredibly taxing morning commute, which consists of you walking approximately 10 paces from the sleeping mat inside your hut to the slightly more comfortable, three-legged stool you place just outside the doorway, under the flimsy shade of your tattered awning. You've considered upgrading to a four-legged stool for enhanced stability and a touch of luxury, but the local carpenter, a nomadic fellow who passes through twice a year with a cart full of creaky but serviceable wooden goods, quoted you a price that made your eyebrows ascend to a previously unknown altitude. So, the three-legged stool it remains, a constant, gentle reminder of fiscal prudence. Your pre-dawn, or rather, pre-actual work routine is a masterpiece of efficiency born from long practice and a profound lack of alternative activities. First, the stretches. These aren't some elaborate yogic contortions, more a series of slow, deliberate extensions of limbs, accompanied by the sort of groans and sighs that would make a professional mourner proud. You touch your toes, or at least the general vicinity of your ankles, arch your back like a startled cat, and rotate your neck until it produces a satisfying, if slightly alarming, series of cracks. This, you tell yourself, is vital for maintaining peak toll collecting fitness. One must be limber to reach for the ledger, after all. Next comes the crucial ritual of tea. Or, well, tea. What you possess is a small pouch of dried leaves and twigs of uncertain botanical origin, purchased from a Sogdian merchant who swore it was the emperor's own blend, though you suspect the emperor in question might have been an emperor of particularly hardy desert weeds. You have a small, smoke-blackened clay pot specifically for this purpose. Water, from the larger clay pot inside, is poured in, a precious commodity you use sparingly. You then build a tiny fire just outside your hut, using a few precious sticks of dried scrub brush you collected yesterday evening and a handful of dried camel dung, the ubiquitous, surprisingly efficient fuel of the steppes. Historians still argue about the exact moment tea transitioned from a medicinal brew to a daily beverage across different cultures, but for you, it's less about the nuanced history and more about having something warm and vaguely flavored to sip while you wait for the world to bother you. The fire catches slowly, a reluctant flicker that gradually grows into a small, steady flame. You place the pot carefully over it, propped on a few well-chosen stones. While it heats, you perform other essential morning tasks. You check your ink pot, ensuring there's enough ink for the day's anticipated flurry of, well, maybe a light shower of transactions. You sharpen a reed pen with your small, trusty knife, shaving the tip to a fine point, a task that requires a surprising amount of concentration. Dropping your only good knife in the dust would be a minor tragedy, involving at least 5 minutes of irritated searching. You also scan the horizon. East and west. Still nothing but shimmering heat haze and the endless, undulating landscape. The sheer predictability is, in its own way, deeply soothing. No surprises means no problems. Usually. The water in the pot begins to steam, a thin wisp rising into the still air. You toss in a pinch of your emperor's blend, swirl it around a bit, and then let it steep. The resulting brew is a brownish, slightly bitter liquid that probably wouldn't win any awards at a fancy tea tasting competition. But it's warm, it's wet, and it's yours. You pour a small amount into your single, chipped clay cup. There's a particular quirky local belief, one you heard from a passing pilgrim who claimed to have walked all the way from the western regions of the Han Empire, that if a beetle accidentally drowns in your morning tea, it's a sign of impending wealth. You eye your cup suspiciously. So far, only dust motes have taken the plunge, which probably signifies impending, more dust. Sipping your tea, you lean back against the warm wall of your hut. The silence is vast, broken only by the faint crackle of your tiny fire and the distant caw of some unseen bird. This is your quiet time, your moment of contemplation before the hustle and bustle begins. Hustle and bustle, in your context, means maybe 2 caravans before midday if it's a busy period. You contemplate the mysteries of the universe, such as whether the merchant with the suspiciously fat camels will try to declare only half his cargo again, or if that Bactrian camel from the last caravan really did wink at you. These are the profound thoughts that occupy a Silk Route toll collector in the quiet moments of his morning. Sometimes, a small desert creature will make an appearance. A skittish jerboa, perhaps, hopping nervously near your fire before darting away, or a large, iridescent beetle trundling purposefully across the sand as if on a very important, beetle-related mission. You watch them with mild interest. They are, after all, your closest neighbors. You've even named a particularly bold lizard who sometimes suns himself on a rock near your stool. You call him tax evader because he never pays any attention to your official presence. Finishing your tea, you carefully extinguish the fire, scattering the ashes. Resources are too precious to waste. The sun is higher now, the shadows shorter. The world is fully awake, even if it hasn't quite reached your doorstep yet. Your short commute and morning preparations complete, you are now officially ready for business. You smooth down your tunic, adjust your stool to the optimal angle for prolonged sitting, and open your ledger to a fresh page, its blankness pregnant with the thrilling possibility of recording the passage of more camels. The excitement is almost palpable. Or perhaps that's just the lingering bitterness of the tea. The sun, now a relentless golden disk in the vast blue sky, beats down with an intensity that makes the air shimmer above the dusty track. You've been at your post, your trusty three-legged stool, for what feels like an eternity, though by the sun's position, it's probably only mid-morning. The highlight of the last hour was a particularly intricate cloud formation that vaguely resembled a sleeping sheep, if you squinted and used a significant amount of imagination. You were just considering whether to start cataloging the different shades of beige in the surrounding landscape when a flicker of movement on the western horizon catches your eye. At first, it's just a smudge, a darker disturbance in the heat haze. You squint, your hand instinctively going up to shield your eyes from the glare, a well-practiced motion. Slowly, very slowly, the smudge begins to resolve itself. It's not a mirage, nor is it one of those dust devils that dance capriciously across the plains. This has substance. This has camels. A genuine, bona fide caravan, your first customers of the day, are finally appearing. A tiny thrill, the closest thing to excitement you'll likely experience before lunchtime, sparks within you. It's showtime. Or, well, toll time. You subtly straighten your tunic, attempting to project an air of officialdom and gravitas, which is somewhat undermined by the fact that your tunic has a small, stubborn stain of indeterminate origin near the hem. You clear your throat, a dry, dusty sound. The approaching caravan is still some distance away, but sound travels strangely in this open expanse. You can just begin to hear the faint, rhythmic plodding of hooves and the occasional, mournful groan of a heavily laden camel, a sound as integral to the Silk Road as the whisper of silk itself. This particular sound is music to your ears, the jingle of potential revenue. As they draw closer, you can start to make out details. It's a relatively small caravan, perhaps half a dozen camels, laden with bulky, cloth-wrapped bundles. A few figures on horseback ride at the front and rear, their heads wrapped in cloth to protect against the sun and dust. They move with the slow, steady pace of seasoned travelers who know that haste makes waste, especially when your cargo is fragile and your next water source is a day's journey away. One of the riders at the front, presumably the caravan leader, spots your little establishment. You see him raise a hand, a signal to the others. The pace, already slow, becomes even more measured as they approach your toll plaza. You remain seated, a picture of calm, unhurried authority. It wouldn't do to seem too eager. Let them come to you. This is your patch, your tiny fiefdom of fees. The lead camel, a magnificent creature with an expression of profound, world-weary disdain that you can strangely relate to, comes to a halt a respectful distance from your stool. Its rider, a man with a deeply tanned face and eyes narrowed against the sun, dismounts. He's probably Sogdian, or perhaps Persian, judging by his attire, a practical, belted tunic and sturdy leather boots. The Sogdians, as everyone knew, were the middlemen of the Silk Road, their network stretching from Constantinople to Chang'an, facilitating much of the trade. A mainstream historical fact is that their language even became a lingua franca along many parts of the route. He approaches you with a slight bow, his hand to his chest. "Peace be upon this station," he says, his voice raspy from the dust. His accent is thick, but understandable. You return the greeting with a nod, equally formal. "And upon you, traveler." "A long journey?" you inquire, your tone mild. It's part politeness, part information gathering. Sometimes a friendly opening can make the subsequent fee discussion a little less strained. "From the Pamirs," he replies, gesturing vaguely westward. "Bound for Kutcha, with goods from the west." He doesn't offer more details, and you don't press. Yet, behind him, The other members of the caravan are dismounting, stretching, tending to their animals. The camels groan and sigh, some kneeling with a practiced, collapsing motion that still looks vaguely alarming. The air fills with the scent of dust, sweat, animals, and perhaps a faint, exotic aroma from one of the bundles, maybe spices, or incense. You get a little frisson of curiosity. This is the closest you usually get to the famed treasures of the Silk Road, these fleeting encounters with the goods themselves. Historians often debate the exact volume and type of goods that traverse these routes, as perishable items rarely leave archaeological traces, but tax records like yours, however humble, provide invaluable clues. You once logged a merchant carrying a caged peacock, which caused quite a stir and a lengthy debate about whether it counted as livestock or luxury ornamental fowl for tariff purposes. That was a wild week. The caravan leader waits patiently. He knows the drill. This little dance of greeting and initial assessment is part of the journey. You pick up your reed pen, dip it in the ink, and poise it over the open page of your ledger. The thrill of the first transaction of the day. You try to keep your expression neutral, professional. Inside, you're already running a quick mental calculation: number of camels, estimated size of cargo, general air of prosperity, or lack thereof, of the merchant. It's a finely honed skill, this initial appraisal. One quirky, unverified tale you heard from a passing monk was that some toll collectors further east had trained monkeys to quickly assess the value of goods by smell, though you highly suspect that was just a tall tale to impress gullible travelers. Or perhaps a very early attempt at customs automation. You stick to visual cues and experience. The day's thrilling work of assessment is about to begin. The caravan leader, a man whose face is a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles and wind-chapped patience, stands before you, awaiting your pronouncement. Your reed pen hovers over the ledger, a tiny instrument of fiscal power. Now comes the intricate, deeply unexciting core of your job, the art of the fee. It's not just a matter of plucking a number from thin air, oh no. There's a system, a beautiful, mind-numbing system, likely established by some distant bureaucrat who never had to smell a camel up close. All right, you begin, your voice taking on a slightly more official, if still sleepy, tone. Let's see what treasures you're gracing our humble pass with today. You gesture with your pen towards the laden camels, their burdens swathed in coarse, dusty sacking or thick felt. Number of beasts? 6 camels, good sir, the merchant replies, his gaze steady. And 2 horses for the guards. You make a small notation in your ledger. Camels, of course, are the workhorses, or rather, work camels, of the Silk Road, capable of carrying immense loads and enduring the harsh desert conditions. Horses are more for speed and the occasional show of status by the guards. The fee for a camel is generally higher than for a horse, given their cargo capacity. And the nature of your cargo, you inquire, peering at the bundles as if you possess X-ray vision capable of discerning fine silk from cheap pottery through 3 layers of canvas. In reality, you're mostly looking at the size and shape, and trying to gauge if they look particularly heavy or awkwardly balanced, which might suggest something valuable or delicate. The merchant hesitates for a fraction of a second, a classic tell. A mixed consignment, he says, a little too smoothly. Some textiles from the Roman lands, a few crates of glassware, and general provisions. General provisions, you echo, tapping your chin with the end of your pen. This is a wonderfully vague term, often used to describe anything from sacks of dates to, on one memorable occasion, a crate full of rather alarmed-looking ferrets that a traveler insisted were emotional support animals. Historians still argue whether standardized customs declarations were a common feature along the entire Silk Road, or if it was largely left to the discretion and honesty, or lack thereof, of individual merchants and collectors like yourself. Your experience suggests a healthy dose of the latter. You make another note. Textiles and glassware. Valuable items, those. The fee structure, which you have mostly committed to memory, it's not like there's a lot else to memorize out here, is a complex matrix. So much per camel, an additional levy for certain luxury goods like silk, the holy grail of Silk Road cargo, spices, or precious metals. Then there's a smaller fee for essentials like grain or basic tools. Animals themselves often incur a per-head charge. Sometimes, there's even a dust disturbance fee if the caravan is particularly large, though you usually waive that for smaller groups unless you're feeling particularly bureaucratic. It's a system designed to extract a modest but steady stream of revenue from the river of goods flowing past. One quirky, and likely apocryphal, story you heard was of a toll collector far to the east who charged a shadow tax, a small fee based on the length of a camel's shadow at noon, arguing that long shadows used up more of the emperor's valuable sunlight. You chuckled when you heard that one, filing it away under creative accounting. The glassware, you continue, is it fragile? A rhetorical question, mostly. All glassware is fragile, especially after several hundred miles on a camel's back. But if he admits it's particularly fragile and valuable, that might nudge the fee up a tiny bit. It's a delicate dance. Handled with the utmost care, of course, the merchant assures you, placing a hand over his heart as if to emphasize his profound respect for delicate merchandise. You nod slowly, making a show of deep calculation. You glance at the sun, as if its position has some bearing on the current exchange rate for Roman glass. You look back at the merchant, then at his camels, then at your ledger. The silence stretches, punctuated only by the snuffling of a nearby camel and the distant buzz of an unseen insect. This is all part of the performance. You can't just blurt out a number. It has to feel considered, weighty, official. The true art is making the merchant feel like the fee is fair, or at least unavoidable, without provoking an outright argument or, worse, convincing him to try a different, untaxed, and probably much more dangerous route next time. Your superiors, distant and unseen as they are, wouldn't appreciate a drop in revenue due to excessive zeal or, conversely, undue leniency. Finally, after what feels like an appropriate period of solemn deliberation, you name your price. Based on the declared goods, the number of animals, and the current regional tariff supplement for luxury items, that will be 12 silver pieces, and a small measure of good quality grain for the station's upkeep. The grain is a common addition, a sort of in-kind payment that helps keep your own meager pantry stocked. It's a mainstream practice in many pre-modern economies where hard currency might be scarce or its value fluctuating. The merchant's eyebrows do a little dance. Not a full-blown shock descent, but a subtle twitch that tells you he was hoping for, perhaps, 10. This is where the next stage of your thrilling day often begins, the polite haggling. You brace yourself, your expression remaining one of serene, unshakable fiscal rectitude. You have your fee schedule, after all. And mostly, you stick to it. Mostly. The merchant, whose name you learn is Ardashir, lets out a soft, almost inaudible sigh. It's not a sigh of outrage, more like the gentle deflation of a slightly over-optimistic wineskin. 12 silver pieces and a measure of grain. He strokes his neatly trimmed beard, a gesture of contemplation that you've seen 1,000 times. This is the preamble to the polite haggling rituals, a dance as old as trade itself, and one you perform with the weary expertise of a seasoned professional. 12 silver, he repeats slowly, as if tasting the number, letting it roll around his tongue like a particularly sour grape. A significant sum, good tollmaster, for a humble purveyor of modest goods. He gestures towards his bundles, which suddenly seem to shrink in size and importance under his deprecating gaze. The roads have been hard, the market slow. Times are challenging. You offer a sympathetic, yet firm, nod. The times are always challenging for honest traders, Ardashir, you reply, your voice smooth and even. Yet the Emperor's roads must be maintained, and the watchtowers manned. Your contribution ensures safe passage for all. This is a standard line, part of the unofficial script. It implies that his fee isn't just disappearing into your pocket, though a small percentage undoubtedly helps keep your own tunic stitched, but is contributing to the greater good, the Pax Emporia, if you will. It's a bit like modern taxpayers being told their money is for schools and hospitals, even when they suspect a good chunk is funding a new ornamental fountain for the governor's third cousin. Ardashir tries a different tack. The glassware, good master, is not of the finest quality. More utilitarian, shall we say. Suitable for everyday use, not for the palaces of kings. He subtly downplays the value of his cargo. A classic move. You make a show of considering this. Ah, utilitarian glassware. Still, it travels far, and its journey is protected. You tap your ledger lightly. The tariffs are set by wiser heads than mine, alas. I merely apply them. This is another key phrase, deflecting responsibility to a higher, unseen authority. It depersonalizes the fee, making it seem less like you are demanding the silver, and more like you are both unfortunate pawns in a larger bureaucratic game. A mainstream historical fact is that complex tax systems, often with layers of officials and set rates, were characteristic of many large empires, from Rome to Han China, to ensure consistent revenue. Your little toll booth is just a tiny cog in that vast machine. Perhaps, Ardashir ventures, his voice hopeful, if we consider the grain portion. I have some excellent barley, but a full measure seems generous, given the current market price of barley in Kutcha. He's now quibbling over the details, trying to chip away at the edges of the fee. This is progress, of a sort. It means he's accepted the silver amount in principle. You purse your lips. The station's needs are constant, Ardashir. Good quality grain is always welcome. However, you pause, letting a little uncertainty creep into your voice. This is where a tiny bit of flexibility can smooth things over. Perhaps if the barley is indeed of superior quality, a slightly less, heaping measure might suffice. You're not giving much away, but it's an olive branch. Historians still argue about the degree of autonomy individual toll collectors had. Were they strictly bound by centrally dictated rates, or did they have leeway to negotiate, perhaps based on local conditions, the perceived wealth of the merchant, or even their own mood that day? Your approach is generally to stick close to the official rates but allow for minor concessions on the in-kind portion, especially if the merchant is polite and not obviously trying to pull a fast one. It keeps the commerce flowing smoothly. One particularly quirky fringe theory you once overheard from a traveling storyteller was that some toll collectors used a set of weighted dice to randomly determine minor tariff adjustments, adding an element of thrilling unpredictability to the process. You suspect that was just a way to justify arbitrary charges, but it was an amusing thought. Ardashir brightens slightly. Superior quality indeed. From the fertile valleys near the Oxus River. Plump grains, I assure you. He gestures for one of his men, who rummages in a saddlebag and produces a small pouch. Ardashir pours a few grains into his palm and offers them for your inspection. You examine them with the air of a connoisseur, though frankly, one barley grain looks much like another to you, as long as it's not obviously full of weevils. You say, rubbing a grain between your thumb and forefinger. Acceptable. Very well. A generous 3/4 measure of this fine barley, then, along with the 12 silver pieces. Ardashir beams, or at least, his expression lightens considerably. You are a fair and discerning man, tollmaster. A credit to your station. He's laying it on a bit thick now, but it's all part of the closing ritual. He has saved a tiny fraction on the grain, preserving his honor as a shrewd negotiator, and you have secured the bulk of your assessed fee. Everyone wins, sort of. He counts out the silver coins, a mix of Sasanian drams and perhaps a few cushion pieces, their designs worn smooth with travel, into your waiting palm. You check them quickly for clipping or obvious fakes, another small but necessary skill of your trade. The coins feel cool and heavy. Another successful, if remarkably low stakes, negotiation concluded. You meticulously record the transaction in your ledger, artist of the premiers. 6 camels, 2 horses. Textiles, glassware. Fee, 12 silver, 3/4 measure barley, superior. Your handwriting is, as always, a testament to function over form. The day is looking up. You've made your first sale, and it only took a few hours of waiting and 5 minutes of gentle verbal sparring. At this rate, you might even afford that 4-legged stool by next year. Or perhaps just a slightly better quality of Emperor's Blend tea. One must have dreams, after all, even if they are remarkably unexciting. With the silver coins safely stowed in your worn leather pouch and the modest measure of Ardashir's superior barley added to your stores, the caravan prepares to move on. Farewells are exchanged, polite, brief, and tinged with the mutual relief of a transaction completed without undue fuss. You watch them go, the camels slowly regaining their momentum, kicking up small plumes of dust that hang in the still air before settling back onto the parched earth. Soon, they are just a receding smudge on the eastern horizon, and silence, vast and profound, reclaims your little stretch of the Silk Road. The sun has climbed higher, now approaching its zenith. It hangs directly overhead, a molten orb beating down with unforgiving intensity. The flimsy shade of your awning offers minimal respite. It's time for your midday meal, an event that scores remarkably low on the excitement scale, even by your standards. If your life were a banquet, this meal would be the slightly stale bread roll everyone politely ignores. Your culinary preparations are, shall we say, streamlined. You retrieve a small, lumpy water skin from the relative cool of your hut. The water inside is tepid, with a faint, earthy taste from the cured animal hide, but it's wet, and that's what counts. You also produce a handful of dried dates, wrinkled and sugary, and a small, hard disc of flatbread, baked a few days ago and now possessing the consistency of a particularly stubborn roof tile. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the haute cuisine of a remote Silk Route toll station. Gordon Ramsay would probably have a few choice words, none of them complimentary. You settle back onto your 3-legged stool, which by now feels like an extension of your own anatomy. There's no dining table, no pleasant conversation, just you, your austere meal, and the vast, unchanging panorama of the desert. The silence is so complete you can hear the faint buzzing of your own blood in your ears. You chew the flatbread slowly, methodically. It requires significant mastication to render it swallowable, a process that gives you ample time to contemplate the profound mysteries of existence, such as why flatbread always seems to go stale in precisely 2.7 days, irrespective of prevailing atmospheric conditions. Historians still argue about the precise diet of common folk along these trade routes. It varied hugely by region, season, and access to trade goods, but staples like dried fruits, grains, and hearty breads were likely ubiquitous. Your meal is probably a fairly accurate representation of lunch on the go for many a Silk Road traveler, minus the actual go part in your case. You eat with a slowness that mirrors the pace of life around you. Each date is savored, its concentrated sweetness a small burst of pleasure in an otherwise bland culinary landscape. You gaze out at the shimmering heat haze, the distant, blurry mountains, the endless expanse of scrub and rock. Sometimes, if you stare long enough, the patterns in the sand begin to play tricks on your eyes, forming fleeting images, a galloping horse, a soaring eagle, the face of that merchant from Khotan who tried to pay you in counterfeit cowrie shells. You didn't fall for that one, by the way. Your knowledge of obscure currency is surprisingly robust. One quirky tidbit you picked up from a wandering ascetic, who claimed to subsist entirely on sunlight and good intentions, though you saw him eyeing your dates rather wistfully, was that certain desert plants, if chewed correctly, could create a mild sense of euphoria or at least make the landscape seem a little more interesting. you've never been tempted to try. Your job requires a certain level of dull alertness, and besides, the local flora mostly consists of things that look like they'd fight back if you tried to chew them. You prefer the predictable monotony of dates and dry bread. As you eat, you might idly watch a line of ants marching purposefully towards a fallen crumb, their tiny world a hive of activity in stark contrast to your own stillness. Or perhaps a hawk circles high overhead, riding the thermal currents, its keen eyes scanning the ground for any unfortunate rodents. These are your dining companions, the silent witnesses to your solitary repast. There are no colleagues to gossip with, no bustling marketplace sounds, just the whisper of the wind, if it deigns to blow, and the vast, indifferent sky. The concept of a lunch break is, of course, entirely alien to you. Your work and your life are seamlessly intertwined. If a caravan were to appear mid-bite, you'd simply set your bread disc down, carefully, lest it roll into the dust and become even less appealing, and attend to your duties. But today, the road remains stubbornly empty. The world, it seems, has decided to take a siesta along with you. Finishing your meal, you take a long swig of the tepid water. You carefully brush the crumbs from your tunic, waste not, want not, and store the remaining dates and bread back in your hut. The sun is at its fiercest now. Even the lizards are seeking shelter in the shadows of rocks. This is the quietest, hottest part of the day, a time when the world seems to hold its breath. You lean back against the mud brick wall, the heat seeping into your bones, a familiar, soporific warmth. The monotony of your meal is mirrored by the monotony of the landscape, a vast, unchanging canvas of browns and yellows. It's not exciting, it's not glamorous, but it is, in its own way, deeply, profoundly peaceful. Or perhaps that's just the post-lunch carbohydrate slump kicking in. Either way, the afternoon stretches before you, promising more of the same gentle, uneventful passage of time. The sun begins its slow descent from its midday throne, but the heat lingers, a thick, palpable blanket over the landscape. The post-lunch lull settles in, a period of profound stillness where the only movement is the shimmering of the air above the baked earth. This is when boredom, your most constant companion, truly embraces you with its gentle, soporific arms. Your official duties, at this precise moment, involve sitting very still and trying not to melt. It's a challenging role, but you've had years of practice. You've already counted the visible rocks within a 50-pace radius, 173, 2 of which vaguely resemble sleeping camels. You've mentally cataloged the subtle variations in the texture of the dust, fine and powdery near the hut, coarser and grittier towards the track. You've even tried to predict the exact moment the shadow of your awning will touch that particularly prominent thistle. You were off by 3 minutes yesterday, a source of minor personal disappointment. So, what now? How does a 7th-century silk route toll collector, stationed in the middle of nowhere, amuse himself during the long, quiet afternoons? Well, there's always the sky. Cloud watching is a perennially underrated pastime, especially when the clouds are sparse and slow-moving, allowing for deep, almost philosophical interpretation. That wisp over there? Clearly a dragon a bit down on his luck, perhaps after a failed job interview for a position guarding a princess. The larger, fluffier one to the west? Obviously a celestial sheep that's lost its flock. You could write an entire epic poem based on the afternoon's cloudscape, if you had any parchment to spare and, frankly, the inclination. Which you don't. Then there's wildlife observation, a more active, though still remarkably passive, pursuit. You've become quite adept at identifying the local fauna by their calls, their tracks, or even the subtle disturbances they leave in the dust. The flick of a lizard's tail, the scurry of a sand beetle, the distant, mournful cry of a desert fox as dusk approaches, these are the dramas that unfold on your desolate stage. You once spent an entire afternoon watching a dung beetle heroically attempt to roll a perfectly spherical piece of dung, many times its own size, up a slight incline. It was, you have to admit, surprisingly compelling television. You even found yourself silently rooting for the little guy. He made it, by the way. A small victory for perseverance in a vast, indifferent universe. Sometimes, you engage in what might be generously termed manual crafts. You might whittle a piece of dried wood, not into anything specific, just creating shavings and enjoying the simple, repetitive motion. Or you might practice your knot tying skills, using a piece of discarded rope, creating intricate but ultimately useless patterns. A mainstream historical fact is that knot tying was an essential skill for sailors, merchants, and anyone dealing with packing and transport, so perhaps your idle hobby has some distant, practical application. You've also been known to arrange small pebbles into complex geometric shapes, a sort of temporary, miniature Zen garden, only for the wind to gently dismantle your creation an hour later. It's a good lesson in impermanence, you suppose. Singing is an option, though your vocal talents are unlikely to win you a spot in the Emperor's choir. You hum old folk tunes, half-remembered melodies from your childhood, or songs picked up from passing travelers. The lyrics are often muddled, the tunes slightly off-key, but there's no one around to critique your performance, save for the occasional, unimpressed lizard. Your repertoire is small but heartfelt. Historians still argue about the literacy rates among common people in this era and region. While major urban centers and monastic communities were centers of learning, it's less clear for someone in your position. Perhaps you possess a few tattered scrolls, religious texts, or popular poems that you painstakingly reread. Or maybe your literacy is purely functional, limited to the numbers and names you need for your ledger. If you are literate beyond the purely practical, then perhaps you spend some time tracing characters in the dust with a stick, or softly reciting verses to yourself. One quirky, though unsubstantiated, theory suggests that some isolated individuals developed their own private systems of symbols or memory aids to pass the time and record observations. You haven't gone quite that far, but you do have a system for remembering which merchants are likely to haggle aggressively, a small scratch next to their entry in the ledger, and which ones might offer a bit of interesting gossip, a tiny, almost invisible dot. And then, of course, there's napping. The gentle art of the strategic doze. Not a deep, prolonged sleep, you have to maintain some semblance of alertness, just in case a caravan actually appears. But a light, drifting state, perched on your stool, head perhaps nodding gently, senses still vaguely attuned to any unusual sounds. The sun is warm, the silence is profound, and the chances of interruption are minimal. It's the perfect recipe for a quick, refreshing, or at least, time-passing, nap. You've become a connoisseur of the microsleep. These are the subtle ways you weave through the quiet hours. It's not a life of thrilling adventure or intellectual ferment. It's a life lived in the spaces between events, a slow, measured rhythm of observation, minor distractions, and the ever-present, gentle embrace of boredom. You are a master of making something out of nothing, of finding a quiet sort of contentment in the vast emptiness. Or, at the very least, you're very good at waiting. And in your line of work, that's more than half the battle. The other half is trying to remember where you put your good whittling stick. The afternoon wears on, each minute stretching out like a contented cat in a sunbeam. Just as you're contemplating the existential implications of a particular crack in the mud wall of your hut, is it a map of a forgotten river system, or just a crack? A new speck appears on the western horizon. This one is smaller than Ardashir's caravan, perhaps a lone traveler or a very small party. Your professional instincts, dormant for the last few hours, flicker back to life. You subtly adjust your posture on the stool, a silent shift from contemplator of cracks to diligent toll official. As the figure draws nearer, you see it's a single man leading a heavily laden donkey. The man is old, his back bent, his pace slow but steady. He's dressed in simple, patched robes, and a wide-brimmed conical hat shields his weathered face from the sun. He looks less like a wealthy merchant and more like a wandering scholar, or perhaps a pilgrim on a very long, solitary journey. This could be interesting. Or it could be someone with no money trying to trade a philosophical debate for passage. You've had those before. They rarely end well for your grain reserves. He reaches your station and offers a polite, weary bow. "Greetings, keeper of the pass," he says, his voice surprisingly strong for his frail appearance. "May your day be free of vexations." "And yours, old father," you reply. "A long road you travel, it seems." "From the great monasteries of the West," he says, gesturing vaguely towards the setting sun. "Seeking knowledge, and perhaps sharing a little of what I have found." He pats one of the bulky saddlebags on his donkey. "My worldly goods are few, but my stories are many." "Ah. Here we go." You try to keep your expression neutral. "Stories are fine things, old father, but the toll is still due. Even for those light in worldly goods." A mainstream historical fact is that religious pilgrims and scholars often traveled these routes, sometimes carrying sacred texts, relics, or simply seeking fellow practitioners in distant lands. They weren't always wealthy, but their passage was part of the rich cultural exchange fostered by the Silk Road. The old man smiles, a network of fine wrinkles crinkling around his eyes. Of course. Duty must be done." He fumbles in a pouch and produces a few small copper coins, clearly not enough for the standard donkey and cargo toll. "Alas, my purse is as light as my heart is full of ancient wisdom." You sigh internally. This is always awkward. You're not a monster, but regulations are regulations. The standard fee for a donkey and its burden is. He holds up a hand. "Perhaps, good keeper, in lieu of the full silver, I could offer you something more unique. A curiosity I acquired in the distant city of Balk." Your interest is piqued, despite your professional skepticism. A curiosity? This is where the strange cargo, stranger tales part of your job description sometimes comes into play. Most of the time it's just more textiles or pottery, but occasionally, something truly unusual passes through. You once had a merchant trying to transport a cage full of singing mice he claimed were trained by mountain sorcerers. They mostly just squeaked. The old man reaches into one of his saddlebags and, after some rummaging, pulls out a small, cloth-wrapped object. He unwraps it carefully, revealing a strangely shaped piece of dark, polished wood, about the size of your hand. It's carved with intricate, swirling patterns that seem to shift and change as he turns it in the light. It's unlike anything you've seen before. "This," he says, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "is a dream stick from the nomadic tribes beyond the Oxus. They say if you hold it while you sleep, it guides your dreams to pleasant pastures and wards off nightmares." You eye the dream stick dubiously. "It looks like a fancy bit of kindling." "Pleasant pastures, you say?" As a connoisseur of sleep, this does have a certain appeal. Still, it's not exactly silver. Historians still argue about the extent to which barter and trade in kind persisted alongside monetized transactions on the Silk Road, especially in more remote areas or for smaller, less formal exchanges. Your gut feeling is that it was pretty common, especially when hard currency was scarce. Indeed, the old man insists. And as a bonus, I can tell you the story of how the great hero Rustum once used a dream stick just like this to find the lost city of pearl and jade. He winks. It's a very long story. Very detailed. Perfect for a quiet afternoon. A long story. That, at least, is a familiar currency. And the dream stick, well, it's certainly unusual. You've seen merchants try to pass off all sorts of oddities as valuable. One fringe theory, more folklore than actual history, suggests that some of the more bizarre items traded along the Silk Road were actually coded messages or symbols, their true meaning known only to a select few. This dream stick probably isn't one of those, but it's definitely a conversation starter. You weigh the few copper coins in your hand against the strange wooden object and the promise of a lengthy tale. Your afternoon is looking decidedly less boring. "All right, old father," you say slowly. "The dream stick, the copper, and the story of Rustum. But make it a good one. And not too loud, I might nod off." The old man's face lights up. "An excellent choice, good keeper. You have a discerning eye for true value." He hands over the dream stick and the coins. As he settles himself on a patch of ground near your stool, ready to begin his epic, you can't help but feel a small sense of anticipation. Maybe today won't be entirely about camels and barley after all. Strange cargo, stranger tales. It's what keeps even the most unexciting job from being completely predictable. The old scholar, whose name you learn is boredom, settles himself comfortably on the dusty ground, his donkey cropping patiently at a few resilient tufts of desert grass nearby. He takes a sip of water from his own water skin, clears his throat, and with a twinkle in his eye, begins his tale of Rustum and the lost city of pearl and jade. His voice is a low, melodious hum, perfectly suited for storytelling on a quiet, sun-drenched afternoon. You, in turn, lean back on your trusty stool, the peculiar dream stick resting on your lap, and prepare to be, well, mildly entertained. Or, more likely, lulled into a gentle stupor. As Barham spins his yarn, a wonderfully convoluted epic involving brave heroes, mischievous jinn, riddles that unlock hidden pathways, and an improbable amount of conveniently located oases, you perform your other crucial, if less glamorous, afternoon task, updating the sacred ledger. Even for a transaction as unconventional as this, a record must be made. Your superiors, however distant and abstract they may seem, appreciate meticulous bookkeeping. It's the bedrock of any functioning bureaucracy, a mainstream historical fact that transcends empires and eras. From the clay tablets of Mesopotamia listing sheep and barley to the digital spreadsheets of today, the urge to count, categorize, and record is a deeply human, and deeply administrative, instinct. You dip your reed pen into the ink pot. The ink is getting a little thick. You make a mental note to add a drop or two of water later. On a fresh line, you begin to write. Traveler, Barham, scholar/pilgrim. Describing his profession is a little tricky. He's not exactly a merchant, but he's not just a wanderer either. Scholar/pilgrim seems to cover the ambiguity nicely. Conveyance, one, donkey, moderately laden. You glance at the donkey. It does look rather burdened with saddlebags, probably full of more dream sticks and obscure philosophical treatises. Next, the crucial part, cargo declared, wisdom, stories, one, carved wooden artifact, purported dream stick. You pause. How do you quantify wisdom and stories for customs purposes? This is where the ledger transcends mere accounting and enters the realm of creative interpretation. You decide against trying to assign a monetary value to ancient wisdom. It feels somehow sacrilegious, and besides, what's the exchange rate on enlightenment these days? Fee assessed, here, you hesitate again. The few copper coins he gave you are nominal, barely covering the dust his donkey kicked up. The real payment is the dream stick and the ongoing narrative. Fee paid, three, small copper pieces and one, carved wooden artifact, bartered, value undetermined, and one, oral recitation, epic of Rustum, ongoing. You feel a small surge of pride at this comprehensive entry. It captures the beautiful strangeness of the transaction perfectly. It's probably the most unusual entry you've made all month. You then add a small, almost invisible mark next to Barham's entry, your personal shorthand for interesting character, potentially good source of future stories if he passes this way again. Historians still argue about the informal information networks that existed along these trade routes. Were toll collectors like you simply cogs in a fiscal machine, Or did they also function as subtle intelligence gatherers, noting down unusual travelers, rumors, or movements of large groups? Your ledger, with its cryptic personal annotations, could be a tiny, overlooked piece of that vast, unwritten history. As Barham's story meanders through enchanted gardens guarded by silent automatons and treacherous mountain passes where the wind whispers forgotten secrets, you carefully blot the ink on your entry. The ledger itself is a weighty object, not just physically, but metaphorically. Each line, each name, each sum of money or bartered good, represents a moment of human interaction, a tiny pulse in the vast circulatory system of the Silk Road. It's a record of promises kept, of obligations fulfilled, of the mundane, everyday business that underpin the grand sweep of empires. You are its humble guardian, its meticulous scribe. One quirky fringe theory you once read in a tattered scroll, of dubious origin, admittedly, posited that ledgers kept with particular care and honesty could acquire a kind of benevolent spirit, ensuring fair dealings and smooth commerce for the keeper. You're not sure you believe it, but you always treat your ledger with respect. Just in case. The sun continues its slow journey across the sky. Barham is now describing a talking parrot who holds the key to finding a hidden map. The parrot, apparently, only speaks in riddles and has a penchant for roasted chickpeas. You make a mental note: avoid talking parrots with expensive snack habits. You glance at your ledger again. The ink is dry. The entry is complete. Another transaction, however small and strange, is now officially part of the historical record, or at least, your historical record. This act of recording, of transforming a fleeting interaction into a permanent inscription, feels important, even if no one but you, and perhaps some future, incredibly bored archivist with a magnifying glass, ever reads these pages. It's a way of imposing order on the chaos of the world, of making sense of the endless flow of people and goods. Each character you form with your reed pen is a small act of defiance against the entropy of forgetting. Or perhaps it's just a way to look busy while an old man tells you a very, very long story about a mythical hero. Either way, the sacred ledger's weight feels comforting in its familiarity. Its page is a testament to your diligent, if remarkably unexciting, fiscal duty. The story continues, the sun dips lower, and your ledger patiently awaits the next entry, the next small ripple in the great, slow river of time. Barham's epic tale of Rustum is now, you estimate, somewhere in its 5th hour, or possibly its 3rd canto. It's hard to tell, as he seems to have a fondness for lengthy digressions about the genealogy of minor characters and the precise culinary preparation of mythical feasts. The talking parrot has finally divulged its riddle, after an entire subplot involving a quest for the perfect roasted chickpea, and Rustum is currently navigating a labyrinthine cave system guided by the faint glow of a captured firefly. You, meanwhile, are becoming acutely aware of the changing elements. The sun, which earlier was a relentless oppressor, is now beginning its descent towards the western horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange, purple, and dusty rose. While the heat of the day still radiates from the parched earth, a subtle coolness is starting to creep into the air. It's a familiar shift, this daily transition from furnace to, well, a slightly less intense furnace, soon to be followed by the surprising chill of the desert night. Your exposed position at this lonely toll booth means you are intimately acquainted with the whims of the weather. There's no climate control out here, no sturdy walls of a city to break the wind. You are, quite literally, weathering the elements. A breeze picks up, a gentle sigh at first, then a more insistent whisper, rustling the thatch of your awning and kicking up little eddies of dust around your stool. This wind carries the scent of distant, unseen landscapes, perhaps the dry grasses of the steppe, or the faint, metallic tang of mountains still miles away. It also brings a noticeable drop in temperature. You subtly pull your simple woolen shawl a little tighter around your shoulders. It's not cold yet, not by the standards of the deep winter nights, but the change is palpable. A mainstream historical fact is that desert climates are characterized by these extreme diurnal temperature variations, scorching days followed by surprisingly cold nights. Adapting to this was crucial for survival and comfort for anyone living or traveling in such regions. You glance up at the sky. The clouds, those earlier companions of your boredom, are now tinged with the fiery colors of sunset. They scud across the sky with a new urgency, no longer the lazy, drifting behemoths of midday. Sometimes, these evening winds bring rain, though it's a rare occurrence in this arid land. When it does come, it's often a sudden, violent downpour that turns the dusty tracks into muddy quagmires for a few hours before the thirsty earth swallows it all. You've learned to read the subtle signs, a particular color in the clouds, a change in the wind's direction, the behavior of distant birds, that might herald an approaching storm. Tonight, though, the sky looks clear, promising a cold but dry night. Boredom, seemingly oblivious to the changing light and temperature, continues his narrative, his voice a steady drone against the rising wind. Rustum has just outsmarted a three-headed guardian of a subterranean river, apparently by offering it a very complex string game that tied all its necks in a knot. You file that under unlikely but amusing solutions to mythical problems. The dream stick on your lap feels cool to the touch. You turn it over in your hands. It's surprisingly heavy for its size. You wonder if its polished surface will feel colder still as the night deepens. One quirky local superstition, which you usually dismiss but occasionally find yourself half believing on lonely nights, is that certain types of wood can absorb the cold of the night and retain it, offering a brief moment of coolness if held against the skin on a hot morning. This particular wood, dark and dense, feels like it might just be one of those. You make a mental note to test this theory tomorrow, assuming you remember. The wind is stronger now, tugging at the edges of your ledger pages, forcing you to place a smooth stone on them to keep them from fluttering away. It whistles softly around the corners of your hut, a mournful, lonely sound. This is the time of day when the vastness of the landscape feels most acute, when the encroaching darkness seems to swallow the familiar landmarks, and your small, solitary station feels like the only point of light and warmth in an immense, indifferent universe. You're used to it, of course. Solitude is the price of your employment. But some evenings, especially when the wind howls like a hungry wolf, the loneliness feels a little more present. You shiver slightly, more from the psychological chill of the approaching night than the actual temperature. The desert can be a harsh mistress, beautiful in her desolation, but quick to punish the unprepared. Your little hut, with its mud brick walls and thatched roof, is your only shield against her moods. It's not much, but it's home, at least for now. You think of the caravans out there, like artichers, hopefully finding a sheltered spot to make camp for the night, huddling around their fires, the sound of their camels a comforting presence in the darkness. Historians still argue about the precise routes and the conditions faced by travelers on the Silk Road, especially in its more remote and treacherous sections. While some stretches pass through relatively hospitable lands with established caravanserais, others, like yours, were in truly wild and unforgiving territory. Endurance, resourcefulness, and a healthy respect for the power of nature were essential qualities. You, in your own small way, embody that endurance, sitting here day after day, year after year, a tiny, resilient speck weathering the sun's glare, the wind's bite, and the occasional, very long, story about a hero with a talking parrot. The elements shape you, just as they shape the landscape, carving their patterns into your skin and your soul. And as the last sliver of the sun dips below the horizon, plunging the world into twilight, you know that another desert night, with its cold beauty and profound silence, is about to begin. The twilight deepens, the sky now a canvas of bruised purples and fading oranges. Stars, impossibly bright in the clear desert air, begin to prick the darkening expanse. Barham's voice, though still steady, is starting to show a hint of weariness. Rustum, it seems, has finally found the lost city of pearl and jade, which, disappointingly, turns out to be mostly abandoned and in need of some serious civic repairs. The talking parrot is complaining about the lack of quality chickpeas. Even epic heroes, it appears, have to deal with anticlimaxes. As the last vestiges of daylight fade, your thoughts, as they sometimes do on these quiet evenings, drift towards the less mundane aspects of your job. Not the thrilling adventures of myth, but the more practical, if still mostly theoretical, dangers of the Silk Road, bandits. The word itself conjures images of fierce, turbaned horsemen sweeping down from hidden canyons, a flash of steel, a cloud of dust. It's the stuff of travelers' tales, whispered around campfires, and a perennial concern for anyone transporting valuable goods through these wild lands. Your little toll station, however, is not exactly a prime target. You have no vast treasury, no stores of silk or spices. Your most valuable asset is probably your ledger, and it's unlikely any self-respecting bandit would risk life and limb for a book full of tedious accounting. Still, the thought occasionally flits through your mind, especially when a particularly large and wealthy-looking caravan passes through, their guards bristling with weapons and nervous energy. You watch them go, and a small part of you wonders if they'll make it to their next stop unmolested. A mainstream historical fact is that banditry was a persistent problem along many stretches of the Silk Road. Various empires and local rulers attempted to police the routes, establishing garrisons and patrols, but the sheer distances and difficult terrain made complete security an impossible dream. Merchants often traveled in large, well-armed convoys for mutual protection. The threat was real, though perhaps sometimes exaggerated by storytellers to add a frisson of excitement to their narratives. For you, however, these dangers are mostly perceived, distant. You're too small a fish. Your protection lies in your insignificance, your lack of obvious wealth. The local tribal groups, who might occasionally engage in a bit of opportunistic raiding further afield, generally leave your station alone. Perhaps it's an understanding that your role, however humble, facilitates the trade that ultimately benefits everyone in the region, even them. Or perhaps they just know you rarely have more than a few days' worth of barley and a handful of mixed silver and copper coins. Not exactly a king's ransom. Still, you take minor precautions. The heavy wooden bar on your door is always secured at night. You keep no bright fires burning that might attract unwanted attention from afar. Your most formidable weapon is your profound aura of boredom, which you suspect would deter even the most determined marauder. Imagine them bursting in, demanding treasure, only to find you mid-yawn, offering them a dusty ledger and a dissertation on the declining quality of Sogdian textiles. They'd probably apologize for disturbing you and quietly back out. Historians still argue about the true nature and organization of Silk Road bandits. Were they desperate nomads driven by poverty, organized criminal gangs, or even semi-official raiders tacitly supported by rival local chieftains looking to disrupt trade or extract their own unofficial tolls? The reality was likely a complex mix of all these things, varying from region to region and era to era. One quirky fringe theory you once heard from a nervous merchant, who was carrying a suspiciously large chest he claimed contained sentimental family heirlooms, was that some bandit groups employed omen readers who would advise them on the most auspicious times and targets for raids, based on bird formations or the patterns of sheep entrails. You find this both unsettling and slightly comical. Imagine a bandit chief consulting his entrail expert. Right, lads, the liver says we hit the spice caravan on Tuesday, but only if a magpie flies left to right across the moon. You don't dwell on these thoughts for long. Worrying about hypothetical bandits is a waste of perfectly good napping time. Your reality is far more mundane: the wind, the stars, the occasional howl of a distant jackal, and Barham, who is now explaining, in excruciating detail, the architectural flaws of the lost city's main aqueduct. It's strangely soothing. The vast emptiness that surrounds you, which could feel threatening, instead offers a kind of protection. You are too isolated, too insignificant for the grand dramas of violence and plunder. Your battles are fought with tedium and the occasional stubborn merchant. The stars are fully out now, a breathtaking, glittering canopy. The Milky Way spills across the sky like a river of diamonds. You've learned to identify a few constellations, picked up from passing travelers who used them for navigation. Orion the Hunter, the Great Bear, the Serpent. They are silent, steadfast companions in the long nights. Their predictable celestial march is a comfort, a reminder of order in a sometimes chaotic world. Compared to their cosmic grandeur, the thought of a few scruffy bandits seems rather small. Your eyelids are getting heavy. Bahram's voice is a gentle murmur, the words losing their individual meaning and blending into a soft, rhythmic sound. The theoretical dangers of the road, the whispered tales of bandits and raids, fade into the background, replaced by the much more immediate and pressing concern of finding a comfortable position on your stool for a pre-bedtime dose. The real threat tonight isn't a band of marauders, it's the distinct possibility of falling off your stool if you nod off too deeply. And that, you think with a sleepy smile, is a danger you can probably manage. Bahram's voice finally begins to wind down, much like the Epic of Rustum itself, which, after many more improbable adventures involving a talking fish and a competition to see who could stay silent the longest, Rustum apparently won, to the surprise of no one who has listened to Bahram for the past 6 hours, has reached a somewhat satisfactory, if slightly abrupt, conclusion. The lost city of pearl and jade is, it turns out, still mostly lost, but Rustum has learned a valuable lesson about the importance of good plumbing. Or something. You weren't entirely paying attention to the denouement. The moon, a slender crescent, has risen, casting a pale, ethereal glow over the landscape. The stars remain dazzling. The air is now decidedly cold, carrying the clean, sharp scent of the desert night. You can see your breath misting faintly in the moonlight. It's late. The vast silence of the desert has reasserted itself, broken only by the occasional sigh of Bahram's donkey and the distant, mournful howl of a jackal, a sound so familiar it's almost comforting, like the ticking of a grandfather clock in a quiet house. Just as you're contemplating suggesting that Bahram might find the interior of your hut, marginally, warmer for the remainder of the night, you see it, a faint flicker of light to the east. Not a star, this is lower, closer to the horizon, and it's moving. Your senses, honed by years of solitary vigilance, sharpen instantly. Another caravan? At this hour? It's unusual, but not unheard of. Some travelers prefer to move during the cooler night hours, especially in the height of summer, or if they're trying to make up lost time. You watch the light grow steadily, resolving itself into the bobbing lanterns of a small group. They are moving slowly, wearily, by the looks of it. This will be your last customer of the day, or rather, of the night. The day's last camel, or perhaps in this case, the night's first. You gently nudge Bahram, who has begun to doze, his head lolling against his saddlebag. "Company, old father," you murmur. He jerks awake, blinking. "Eh? What? Has Rustum found another talking animal?" "No, a caravan," you say, gesturing towards the approaching lights. As they draw nearer, you can make out 3 camels, heavily laden, and 2 riders. They look exhausted. The lead rider, a woman wrapped in a dark, heavy cloak, her face obscured by shadows, calls out a greeting as they approach. Her voice is tired but clear. "Ho, the station! We seek passage and perhaps a moment's rest, if the keeper is willing." "Passage you shall have, for the usual fee," you reply, your voice carrying easily in the still night air. Rest is free, though the accommodations are Spartan. You're not about to turn away weary travelers at this hour, toll or no toll initially, but business is business. They halt before your station, the camels groaning their relief as they sink to their knees. The woman dismounts, moving with a weary grace. She pushes back her hood, revealing a strong, tired face, her eyes reflecting the lantern light. She looks like a merchant of some standing, despite her current dishevelment. Her companion, a younger man, possibly her son or a trusted retainer, remains mounted, his hand resting near the hilt of a sword at his belt, a sensible precaution, even when approaching a humble toll booth. "We have had a long and difficult journey," the woman says, her gaze sweeping over your small setup. "Delayed by a rock slide in the western passes. We had hoped to reach the oasis by nightfall, but—" She shrugs, a gesture of tired resignation. A mainstream historical fact is that travel on the Silk Road was always subject to the unpredictable whims of nature, rock slides, sandstorms, floods, and heavy snows in the mountain passes could delay or even halt caravans for days or weeks. The road cares little for our plans, you agree, with the profound wisdom of someone whose plans rarely extend beyond deciding which type of dust to observe next. "Let's settle the toll, and then you may rest here until dawn if you wish. The ground is hard, but it's safer than the open track." She nods gratefully. "Thank you, good keeper. We carry silks from Fergana, bound for the markets of the Darim Basin." She names a quantity. Silks are a high tariff item. Your sleepy brain does a quick calculation. This will be a decent final entry in the ledger for the day. The transaction is completed with a tired efficiency. She pays in good silver, without haggling, a sign of both her weariness and perhaps her relief at reaching even this humble outpost of civilization. You meticulously record the details in your ledger by the flickering light of one of their lanterns, your handwriting even spideier than usual in the dim illumination. Caravan, late passage. 3 camels. Cargo, Fergana silks. Leader, woman, name undisclosed. Fee, appropriate amount, silver. You decide against asking her name. At this hour, anonymity is probably preferred by all parties. Historians still debate the role and visibility of women in Silk Road trade. While men undoubtedly predominated, there is evidence of women participating as merchants, caravan leaders, and artisans. Their stories are often harder to find in the historical record, but they were there, braving the same dangers and hardships as their male counterparts. This late-night encounter is a small, fleeting glimpse into that less-told aspect of Silk Road life. One quirky, and frankly rather dubious, tidbit you once heard from a Sogdian trader, who was known for his tall tales and even taller hat, was that there was a secret society of female merchants who used a special code embroidered into their silk shipments to communicate market intelligence across the continent. You file this away with the dreamstick and the talking parrot, interesting, but probably not something to base your tariff assessments on. With the toll paid, the woman and her companion prepare to make a rough camp near your hut. They unburden their camels, offering them water from their own skins. Bahram, now fully awake again and ever the storyteller, strikes up a quiet conversation with them, perhaps offering a condensed version of Rustam's adventures, or inquiring about the road conditions they've recently traversed. You leave them to it. Your official duties for the day, and now the night, are concluded. The day's last camel, or rather, camels, has passed, paid its dues, and settled in. The ledger can finally be closed. The late-night caravan, led by the resilient silk merchant, has settled into a quiet camp near your hut. Their lanterns cast flickering pools of light, creating an ephemeral, temporary village in the vast darkness. The murmur of their voices, now joined by Bahram's persistent storytelling, is a low, comforting hum. You, however, have official duties to conclude. It's time for the remarkably unexciting, yet deeply satisfying, ritual of locking up shop. This isn't a complex procedure involving multiple deadbolts and a sophisticated alarm system. Your security measures are, like everything else about your establishment, charmingly rudimentary. First, you carefully close your precious ledger. The day's transactions, Ardashir's glassware and barley, Bahram's dreamstick and epic tale, and now the late-night silk merchant silver, are all neatly recorded. You run a hand over the worn leather cover, a familiar, almost affectionate gesture. This book is the sum of your day, a tangible record of your existence and purpose. You place it carefully inside your hut, in its designated spot on the low wooden table, away from the dew and any overly curious nocturnal insects. Next, the ink pot. You ensure the stopper, that trusty piece of dried fig, is firmly in place to prevent the precious ink from evaporating or, worse, spilling. Ink is not easy to come by out here. You either have to make it yourself from soot and gum arabic, a messy, time-consuming process, or trade for it with a passing scholar or merchant who might have a small supply. Each drop is valuable. You place it beside the ledger, its small stone form a familiar weight. Your reed pens are tucked neatly beside it, like loyal soldiers awaiting their next call to duty. Your three-legged stool, your faithful companion through countless hours of sun and shadow, is brought inside. It's too valuable an asset to leave out, not because of thieves, but because the morning dew can make the wood damp and uncomfortable. Plus, there's always the remote chance a particularly large and clumsy desert beetle might try to claim it as its own. You lean it against the interior wall, where it casts a long, spindly shadow in the faint moonlight filtering through the door slit. The cash box, your worn leather pouch containing the day's takings, is secured. This usually involves tucking it deep inside a clay pot that normally holds grain, then placing another, heavier pot on top. It's not exactly Fort Knox, but it's discreet. And frankly, the most valuable thing you possess isn't the silver, but the grain itself, the difference between a full belly and a lean night. A mainstream historical fact for many pre-modern societies was that food security often trumped monetary wealth in terms of immediate, practical value. You can't eat silver coins, after all, though you've heard tales of desperate travelers trying. Finally, the door. You step outside one last time, taking a deep breath of the cool, crisp night air. The stars are magnificent, a glittering tapestry stretching from horizon to horizon. The travelers are quiet now, likely asleep or dozing. Boredom, you notice, has curled up near the embers of their small fire, looking like a contented old cat. You pull the sturdy wooden door of your hut closed. It groans softly on its leather hinges. Then, from the inside, you slide the heavy wooden bar into place. Thunk! A solid, reassuring sound. You are now officially closed for business, secure in your tiny mud brick fortress. The interior of the hut is dark, save for the faint starlight filtering through the narrow window slits. The air is cool and still, smelling faintly of dust, old reeds, and the lingering aroma of Boredom's Emperor's Blend tea from this morning. You unroll your sleeping mat. It's thin, and the floor beneath is hard, but it's familiar, and after a long day of sitting, even a hard floor can feel welcoming. You don't have pajamas, of course. You sleep in the same simple tunic you wear during the day. You lie down, pulling your woolen shawl over you like a blanket. The dream stick, Boredom's peculiar payment, is beside your mat. You pick it up. It feels smooth and cool in your hand. You ponder its alleged magical properties. Will it indeed guide your dreams to pleasant pastures? Or will you just dream of endless caravans of talking parrots demanding roasted chickpeas? Historians still argue about the prevalence and nature of folk beliefs and magical practices among ordinary people in past societies. While official religions and philosophies held sway, a rich undercurrent of local superstitions, charms, and amulets often coexisted. Your dream stick is a tiny artifact from that less documented world. You close your eyes. The sounds of the desert night are muted now by the thick walls of your hut, the distant cry of a nocturnal animal, the faint whisper of the wind, the soft snores emanating from Boredom's general direction. These are the lullabies of your solitary existence. Locking up shop is a brief affair, a simple routine marking the end of one day and the quiet anticipation of the next. There's a certain peace in this closure, a sense of a job, however mundane, done. Your own quiet evening, free from the demands of tolls and ledgers, has begun. It will be filled, mostly, with sleep. And perhaps, if Barham's dream stick has any power at all, with dreams of something other than camels. Though, knowing your luck, it'll probably be camels wearing very elaborate hats. The night deepens, a profound and velvety blackness punctuated by the distant, diamond-like shimmer of the stars. Inside your small, secure hut, you lie on your mat, the day's gentle excitements and profound non-events slowly receding from your conscious mind. The dream stick rests beside you, cool and enigmatic. Barham's epic tales of Rustum, the haggling with Ardashir over barley, the brief encounter with the late-night silk merchant, all these moments, these tiny threads in the vast tapestry of the Silk Road, now become part of your personal history, soon to be overlaid by the experiences of tomorrow. You reflect, as you sometimes do in these quiet pre-sleep moments, on your role in this grand scheme of things. You are not an emperor, a general, or a famous poet whose name will be whispered down the centuries. You will not discover new lands or invent world-changing technologies. Your legacy, if it can even be called that, will be far more modest, written not in stone monuments but in the faint, spidery script of your ledgers. A legacy of tolls collected, of caravans logged, of quiet, diligent service at a forgotten outpost. And yet, there's a certain dignity in it, isn't there? You are a tiny, essential cog in a colossal machine that connects worlds. Because of your presence, and the presence of countless others like you, the caravan leaders, the merchants, the animal handlers, the oasis keepers, the guards, goods and ideas can flow across impossible distances. Silk from the Far East reaches the markets of the Roman world, or what's left of it. Spices from India perfume the courts of distant Khans, and glassware from Alexandria finds its way to remote Buddhist monasteries in the Taklamakan Desert. Philosophies, religions, languages, and technologies all travel these same dusty paths, carried in the minds and hearts of people like Ardashir, Barham, and the unnamed silk merchant. A mainstream historical fact is that the Silk Road was not just about economic exchange. It was perhaps the most significant conduit for cultural diffusion in the ancient and medieval world for centuries. You are a gatekeeper, a facilitator of this extraordinary, slow-motion ballet of commerce and culture. Your daily grind, the seemingly endless repetition of assessing fees and recording transactions, contributes, in its own small way, to this grand, sprawling human enterprise. Each silver coin you collect, each measure of grain you store, is a tiny affirmation of that vast network of trust and necessity. Without these small, consistent acts of order and regulation, the whole fragile system could easily collapse into chaos and banditry, a return to a time when long-distance travel was too perilous for all but the most desperate or foolhardy. Historians still argue about the precise economic impact of the Silk Road on the various empires it connected. Was it a primary driver of prosperity, or more of a luxury trade that benefited only a small elite? The truth, as always, is likely complex and multifaceted. But from your vantage point, watching the slow but steady stream of goods and people, it certainly feels important. You see the weariness in the traveler's eyes, but also the determination, the hope of profit, or the zeal of pilgrimage. You are a witness to their journeys, a small, fixed point in their ever-moving lives. You think of the ledger, safely stored. Each entry is a miniature story. Ardashir of the Pamirs, where is he now? Camped under these same stars, perhaps, dreaming of the markets of Kutcha? Barham, scholar/pilgrim, will his dream stick truly bring pleasant dreams? And the silk merchant, her face tired but resolute in the lantern light, what challenges will she face on her journey through the Darim Basin? You will likely never know the end of their stories, just as they will never know yours beyond this brief intersection at your dusty toll booth. There's a quiet satisfaction in this. You are not seeking fame or fortune. Your ambitions are far more modest, a relatively leak-proof roof, a steady supply of, preferably not too evil-infested, grain, and perhaps, one day, that four-legged stool. It's a life of routine, of predictability, but also of subtle connections to a world far larger and more complex than your immediate surroundings. You are a part of something ancient and enduring. A legacy of tolls, yes, but also a legacy of presence, of quiet watchfulness on the edge of the known world. The dream stick feels a little warmer in your hand now, or perhaps it's just the heat from your own body. As sleep finally begins to claim you, a gentle tide pulling you under, you feel a sense of peace. Your small, consistent role in the vast, unhurried epic of the Silk Route is, in its own remarkably unexciting way, complete for another day. The world outside your hut is hushed, bathed in the soft, silvery light of the moon and the distant, silent stars. The desert breathes slowly, a vast, sleeping creature. The wind has died down, and the only sounds are the natural whispers of the night, the faint rustle of some unseen creature in the scrub, the distant, almost imperceptible sigh of the cooling earth. Inside, your breathing deepens, becoming slow and regular, a gentle rhythm in the stillness. The tensions of the day, the minor calculations of tolls, the effort of listening to Barham's lengthy tales, all these have melted away, leaving only a profound sense of calm. You are drifting now, in that peaceful space between wakefulness and true slumber, a comfortable, weightless journey into the land of dreams. Perhaps the dream stick is working its subtle magic, or perhaps it is simply the natural consequence of a day lived simply and without undue agitation. Whatever the cause, your mind is quiet, untroubled by worries of tomorrow or regrets of yesterday. The images that float behind your eyelids are soft and indistinct, hazy landscapes, the gentle sway of a camel's gait, the warm glow of a distant campfire. There are no sharp edges, no urgent demands, only a soft, pervasive sense of ease. Let the silence of the desert cradle you, let the coolness of the night air soothe you. There is nothing more to do, nothing more to think about. All is well. All is quiet. You are safe and secure in your little haven, a tiny island of peace in the vast stillness. Allow yourself to sink deeper and deeper into that comforting darkness, into the restorative embrace of sleep. Let your thoughts become as light and scattered as the dust motes dancing in a moonbeam. Rest now. Rest deeply. The Silk Road will still be there tomorrow, with its endless stories and its slow, patient rhythm. But for now, there is only the peace of the night, and the promise of sweet, untroubled dreams.